Malcolm Reed had always cherished the idea of a home as a sanctuary, a private space to unwind from the demanding, often brutal world of Washington, D.C. politics. His new house in the leafy, established neighborhood of Oak Haven Hills was meant to be just that. His first act of settling in after the movers left was to oversee the construction of a handsome, sturdy cedar fence around his backyard, a classic American symbol of home, privacy, and a little piece of the world to call one's own. He admired the clean lines, the warm scent of the wood. It was perfect, or so he thought. His new fence, it turned out, was a declaration of war to Mrs. Linda Carmichael, the imperious and iron-willed president of the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association. The first volley arrived in his mailbox less than 48 hours after the last fence post was set. It was a sharply worded letter from the HOA, signed by Linda Carmichael herself. It referred to his brand-new cedar fence as an unapproved and aesthetically discordant structure, further denigrating it as cheap-looking trash that severely detracts from the established character and property values of Oak Haven Hills. The letter demanded the immediate removal of the offending installation and warned of daily fines for noncompliance. Malcolm, a man who navigated the labyrinthine complexities of Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, read the letter with a sigh of weary disbelief. Cheap-looking trash? His fence was high-quality cedar, professionally installed, and well within any reasonable aesthetic standard. He suspected this had less to do with the fence and more to do with him, the new black homeowner in a predominantly white old-money neighborhood. His attempt to discuss the matter rationally with Linda Carmichael proved futile. He found her at the community clubhouse holding court with a group of admiring HOA board members. When he politely introduced himself and tried to show her his building permits and the fence material specifications, she waved a dismissive hand. "Permits can be obtained, Mr. Reed," Linda said, her voice dripping with condescension, her eyes cold and appraising. "But they do not dictate good taste, nor do they supersede the established visual harmony of Oak Haven Hills, which I am charged with upholding. That barrier you've erected is an eyesore. It looks like something from a lumberyard clearance sale. It must go." "Mrs. Carmichael," Malcolm stated, his voice calm but firm, "it is my legal right to erect a fence on my property, and this fence meets all local building codes and, I believe, any reasonable aesthetic standard." "Reasonable by whose standards, Mr. Reed?" Linda retorted, a smirk playing on her lips. "Certainly not by ours. You new people come in here thinking you can change everything. Well, not while I'm president. Remove it or we will." The "we will" took a more sinister turn a few nights later. Under the cover of darkness, someone, clearly acting on behalf of, or with the encouragement of, the HOA leadership, took cans of cheap black spray paint and defaced Malcolm's beautiful new cedar fence. Crude, hateful messages were scrawled across the wood. "Get out! Trash fence! Trashy people! Not welcome here!" Malcolm discovered the vandalism at dawn. A cold, hard anger, the kind he rarely allowed to surface, tightened his jaw. This wasn't just a dispute over aesthetics anymore. This was a hate crime. This was a direct, racist attack on his right to live peacefully in his own home. As if on cue, Linda Carmichael's voice, amplified and grating, began its morning patrol via her ubiquitous golf cart loudspeaker. "Good morning, Oak Haven Hills," she chirped, her voice oozing false sweetness. "Let's all work together to keep our neighborhood beautiful and harmonious. Unfortunately, some individuals insist on erecting unsightly, illegal structures that blight our community. And some," her voice took on a knowing, accusatory tone as she neared Malcolm's house, "even resort to vandalizing their own property to try and gain sympathy or blame others. Such pathetic tactics will not be tolerated. This HOA will ensure standards are maintained, one way or another." He was being accused of vandalizing his own fence. The audacity was breathtaking. Malcolm, a United States Senator, was being publicly slandered by this petty tyrant as a vandal and a liar. The harassment escalated. Neighbors, whipped into a frenzy by Linda's rhetoric and their own latent prejudices, began to join in. Trash, old newspapers, fast food bags, even dog waste started appearing over his newly defaced fence, littering his yard. He'd overhear snippets of conversation from passersby. "Did you see that awful fence? And now it's covered in graffiti. Serves him right," one would say. "Linda was spot on," another would reply. "People like that just bring down the whole neighborhood. She should tear that monstrosity down, and him with it." Humiliating videos filmed by Linda or her cronies began circulating on the HOA's private online forum and through leaks to wider local social media. They showed close-ups of the cheap wood, the shoddy construction, both lies, and lingering shots of the hateful graffiti with Linda's voiceover lamenting how one person's bad taste and defiance can ruin things for everyone. The comment sections were a predictable cesspool of racist invective and gleeful agreement with Linda's campaign. Malcolm, all the while, was meticulously documenting every slur, every act of vandalism, every threatening notice. He installed state-of-the-art, yet discreet security cameras covering every inch of his property line. He was also, of course, managing his senatorial duties. Late-night calls with his chief of staff in D.C. about upcoming votes on judicial appointments, reviewing drafts of new federal legislation on civil rights protections, preparing for committee hearings on national security matters. Sometimes a black car with official government plates would discreetly arrive to pick him up for a flight to Washington or to drop off sensitive briefing documents. Linda's neighborhood spies, like the ever-vigilant Mrs. Henderson, would note these suspicious vehicles and men in dark suits visiting Malcolm's house. "He's definitely involved in something shady, Linda," Mrs. Henderson would report breathlessly. "Probably some kind of political extremist. Or maybe he's being investigated by the feds himself. That fence is probably just a barricade." Linda would nod sagely, her conviction that Malcolm was an undesirable troublemaker, solidifying with each fabricated piece of evidence. The final act of this initial stage of harassment was a formal letter from the HOA's attorney. It declared Malcolm in willful and persistent violation of Oak Haven Hills covenants, conditions, and restrictions, cited the illegal and aesthetically offensive fence installation, and demanded not only its immediate removal at Malcolm's expense, but also payment of $5,000 in accrued fines and community damages. Failure to comply within 7 days, the letter stated, would result in the HOA filing a lawsuit to forcibly remove the fence, place a lien on his property, and seek his eviction for being a persistent nuisance and a detriment to the peace and good order of the community. Eviction. For building a fence, a beautiful legal cedar fence. Malcolm Reed, who had sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, which included the right to private property and due process, was being threatened with the loss of his home by a homeowners association president whose power had clearly gone to her head, fueled by a toxic brew of prejudice and ignorance. He looked at the letter, then out at his defaced fence, a symbol of the ugliness he was now facing. A cold resolve settled within him. Linda Carmichael thought she was dealing with just another resident she could bully into submission. She had no idea she was attempting to build a case against a man who helped write the very laws she was so flagrantly abusing. The Senate Judiciary Committee member was about to get a very personal, very close-up look at how civil rights could be violated at the most local of levels, and he was preparing to respond, not just as a homeowner, but as a guardian of the law. The Oak Haven Hills HOA's formal threat of a lawsuit, rather than intimidating Malcolm Reed, galvanized him. He was a United States Senator, a member of the Judiciary Committee. He understood the law, and he understood an abuse of power when he saw it. He responded to the HOA's attorney with a letter so legally precise, so calmly assertive of his property rights under both state law and the U.S. Constitution, and so clearly outlining the potential liabilities the HOA and its board members were incurring through their campaign of harassment, vandalism, and discriminatory actions, that it should have given any competent legal professional pause. Linda Carmichael's lawyer, a local practitioner named Barry Fineworth, whose primary experience lay in uncontested divorces and slip-and-fall claims, merely saw it as further proof of Malcolm's arrogance and litigious nature. Linda herself dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "He's just trying to scare us with big words," she declared to her compliant HOA board. "A nobody trying to act like he's somebody. We proceed. Full steam ahead. That fence is coming down, and he's paying for it. And so the siege of Malcolm Reed's cedar fence escalated. Malcolm, anticipating further vandalism, had his security team, a discreet private firm he used for his D.C. residence, now subtly monitoring his Oak Haven home, install even more sophisticated, virtually invisible microcameras that captured every angle of his property line with crystal clarity, day and night. He also had the initial graffiti professionally removed and the fence treated with an anti-graffiti coating. This only enraged Linda further. When the fence was clean again, she seemed to take it as a personal affront. Within days, new, even uglier messages appeared, this time in a dripping, blood-red paint. Leave now! No trash here! And most chillingly, a crudely drawn noose. This crossed a line from petty harassment to a clear, unambiguous hate crime. Malcolm, upon discovering it, felt a cold fury, but his outward demeanor remained one of resolute calm. The evidence file was growing. Linda, meanwhile, escalated her public campaign. She called an emergency Oak Haven Hills town hall meeting in the community clubhouse. "Friends, neighbors," she thundered from the podium, her voice quivering with manufactured indignation. "Our community is under attack. This Mr. Reed, this outsider, he not only defies our democratically established rules with his monstrous fence, but he now resorts to threatening your HOA with lawsuits. He tries to intimidate us with fancy legal jargon. He even, and I can barely speak the words, had the audacity to clean his fence after it was redecorated by concerned citizens." This last bit drew gasps of outrage from her core supporters, as if cleaning graffiti was an act of aggression. "He is a menace, a troublemaker, and we must stand united to expel him and his eyesore from our beautiful Oak Haven Hills." The neighbors' complicity, fueled by Linda's relentless propaganda, deepened. The trash thrown over Malcolm's fence became a daily ritual for some. Children, mimicking their parents, would shout insults. One afternoon, while Malcolm was on an important video conference in his home office with the Attorney General of the United States discussing a new piece of federal civil rights legislation, a rock shattered his study window, narrowly missing him. His security detail, monitoring remotely, immediately alerted local police, who arrived, took a report, but found no culprits willing to confess. Linda, when questioned by an officer, suggested Malcolm probably threw the rock himself for attention. The hints of Malcolm's true identity continued to provide a rich vein of dramatic irony, all utterly lost on Linda and her acolytes. One Saturday, a C-SPAN crew with official credentials was discreetly filming B-roll footage in various typical American neighborhoods for a documentary segment on the private lives of public servants. Oak Haven Hills, with its tree-lined streets, had been on their list. They were seen filming near Malcolm's house, from public property. Mrs. Henderson, Linda's chief informant, immediately called Linda in a panic. "Linda, the media is here. National television. They're outside Reed's house. He must have called them. He's trying to make us look bad, trying to play the victim on TV. This is an outrage." Linda, furious, actually drove her golf cart over and tried to shoo the C-SPAN crew away, accusing them of trespassing and harassing residents. Much to their bemused professionalism, they simply filmed her tirade, which later made for some interesting outtakes. Another time, Malcolm was expecting a visit from a very senior colleague, the Senate Majority Leader, for a highly confidential discussion about an upcoming international treaty vote. The Majority Leader arrived in a standard black sedan with his low-key security detail. They were met at the door by Malcolm and quickly went inside. Mrs. Henderson, nearly having a stroke, reported to Linda, "Men in black! More of them. They look like government agents, Linda. Maybe mafia. They went into his house and they haven't come out. He's holding secret meetings with dangerous people." Linda was now convinced Malcolm was not just a troublemaker, but possibly a spy or a mob boss. "That fence isn't for privacy," she theorized to her board. "It's a fortress." Malcolm, during one of Linda's increasingly unhinged loudspeaker drive-bys, where she was accusing him of harboring fugitives, referring to the Senate Majority Leader's visit, calmly stepped out and informed her, from his side of the fence, that her accusations constituted slander per se, and that her continued harassment was creating a hostile environment in violation of several federal statutes he could happily enumerate for her. Linda, enraged by his calm citation of law, just shrieked, "More fake laws! You're not a lawyer, you're a lunatic," and sped off. The pressure on Malcolm was immense. He was juggling his duties as a U.S. Senator, drafting bills, attending remote committee hearings, dealing with national crises, while simultaneously enduring this relentless, petty, and increasingly dangerous siege on his own home. His staff in D.C. were deeply concerned, urging him to use his official position to shut it down. But Malcolm was adamant. "No," he told his chief of staff, "this isn't about Senator Reid. This is about what any citizen, any black man, could face from an abusive, unchecked HOA. I am experiencing this as Mr. Reid, the homeowner. And Mr. Reid, the homeowner, will seek justice through the proper channels. But believe me, the evidence Mr. Reid is gathering will be invaluable to Senator Reid's work on the Judiciary Committee regarding HOA reform and civil rights protections." The Oak Haven Hills HOA, under Linda's fanatical leadership, officially filed their lawsuit in the local county court. The suit demanded the immediate dismantling of Malcolm's illegal and offensive fence, payment of all accumulated fines, now totaling over $10,000, substantial punitive damages for his willful defiance in creation of community disharmony, and his legal costs. Linda Carmichael herself, accompanied by a smirking Barry Fineworth and a local news crew she had personally invited to witness her triumph of justice, served the papers to Malcolm at his front door. "Consider yourself served, Mr. Reid," Linda announced dramatically for the cameras. "Your reign of ugliness in Oak Haven Hills is over. We'll see you in court, where you will be exposed for the disruptive charlatan you are." Malcolm accepted the documents with a calm, almost unnervingly serene expression. He looked at Linda, at her lawyer, at the news crew. "Thank you, Mrs. Carmichael," he said, his voice even. "I will certainly be in court, and I trust you will be too. It promises to be a most illuminating session." He then added with a slight knowing smile, "I've taken the liberty of inviting a few additional interested parties from the press corps who cover, let's just say, matters of significant public and federal interest. I believe they'll find the proceedings quite relevant to their usual beats." Linda, too caught up in her moment of perceived victory to register the subtle warning in his tone, just scoffed. "Bring whomever you like, Mr. Reid. The more people who witness your downfall, the better." She swept away, followed by her entourage, convinced she had finally cornered him. Malcolm watched them go. He held the lawsuit papers in his hand. The local court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. He walked back into his house, picked up his secure phone, and made a call to his Senate press secretary. "Sarah," he said, "that Oak Haven Hills HOA situation we've been monitoring? It's officially going to court next Tuesday morning. Local county courthouse. I think it's time we issued a carefully worded advisory to the national press pool. Subject: U.S. Senator to confront local HOA over alleged civil rights violations and property abuse. Yes, I think that should generate some appropriate interest. Oh, and have my Judiciary Committee staff prepare a full brief on federal oversight of HOAs. It might be time for some new legislation." The game was truly afoot now, and Linda Carmichael was about to find out what happened when you tried to tear down the fence of a United States Senator who sat on the Judiciary Committee. The morning of the scheduled county court hearing dawned bright and clear. Linda Carmichael, dressed in what she considered her most authoritative pantsuit, arrived at Malcolm Reid's house precisely at 8 a.m., an hour before the hearing. She wasn't alone. She had her loyal HOA board vice president, a smug Barry Fineworth, her lawyer, and, to her delight, the local news crew she had personally invited to document Malcolm's final moments of defiance before justice is served. She intended to make one last public demand for the $5,000 fine and the immediate dismantling of the offensive fence, all for the cameras. "Mr. Reid," Linda called out, rapping sharply on his front door, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips as she saw the news camera focusing on her. "Your time is up. Are you ready to face the consequences of your arrogance and pay what you owe this community? Or must we drag you through the courts?" Just as Malcolm's door began to open, several more vehicles, sleek black sedans and vans with tinted windows, pulled up silently along Sycamore Street. Doors opened, and a significant number of serious-looking men and women emerged. Clearly not local news. They carried professional cameras, boom mics, and press passes from national news outlets. CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, The New York Times. Linda initially looked thrilled. "More press to witness my victory," she whispered to Barry, who suddenly looked very nervous. Malcolm Reed stepped out onto his porch. He was not dressed in the casual attire Linda was used to. He wore an impeccably tailored dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtly striped silk tie. He exuded an aura of quiet, formidable authority. "Good morning, Mrs. Carmichael, Mr. Fineworth," Malcolm said, his voice calm and resonant, carrying easily to the assembled press. "And good morning to the members of the local and national press. Thank you all for coming on such short notice." Linda, slightly flustered by the unexpected national media presence, but still high on her perceived power, scoffed. "Who did you call, Reed? Your fancy liberal media friends? They can't save you from Oak Haven Hills justice?" Malcolm ignored her. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small, leather-bound wallet. From it, he didn't pull out a checkbook. He pulled out an official, gold-embossed identification card. He held it up for all the cameras to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," Malcolm announced, his voice now imbued with a gravitas that silenced the entire street, "my name is Malcolm Reed. I am indeed a resident of Oak Haven Hills. I am also the duly elected United States Senator for this great state and a senior serving member of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee." The effect was instantaneous and electric. The local news crew's jaws dropped. Barry Fineworth looked like he was about to faint. Linda Carmichael's face went from smug triumph to a ghastly mottled white. She stumbled back a step, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. The national press corps surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust out. A, a senator?" Linda stammered, her voice barely a squeak. You can't be." "Oh, but I am, Mrs. Carmichael," Senator Reed stated, his gaze unwavering. "And while you have been illegally defacing my private property, orchestrating a campaign of slander and racial harassment against me, in attempting to extort fictitious fines, I and my office have been otherwise occupied." He gestured towards the newly arrived FBI agents, who were now discreetly but firmly making their way towards Linda and her HOA colleagues. "This cheap trash fence you so despise was built on my private property in full compliance with all laws. Your attempts to have it removed, your vandalism of it with hateful graffiti, 'Get out,' I believe was one of the more charming messages, are not just petty neighborhood squabbles. When directed at a citizen with the intent to intimidate them based on their race or to interfere with their lawful enjoyment of their property, they become serious federal matters." He continued, his voice a cold, precise indictment. "Your HOA's actions, Mrs. Carmichael, including the incitement of your neighbors to commit acts of vandalism and harassment, the public defamation, and the abuse of your HOA authority to levy baseless fines and threats of eviction, constitute a clear pattern of discriminatory practices and a potential conspiracy to violate my civil rights under the Fair Housing Act and other federal statutes. My staff on the Judiciary Committee has found your HOA's conduct particularly illustrative of certain systemic problems we are currently addressing." As he spoke, the lead FBI agent reached Linda. "Linda Carmichael," the agent said, his voice calm but final, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to violate federal civil rights, aiding and abetting the malicious destruction of private property, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent." Linda let out a wail of despair and denial. "No, it was just a fence. An ugly fence. He's the one who... She collapsed into a sobbing, incoherent heap as the handcuffs were clicked into place. Barry Fineworth looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. The remaining HOA board members were frozen in terror. The neighbors who had gathered to mock Malcolm were now either slinking away in shame or staring in horrified disbelief. "He's really a senator," one of them whispered to another. "Linda sued a U.S. senator over a fence? She's completely insane. She's ruined us all." Senator Malcolm Reed then addressed the national press, who were now in a frenzy. "Let this unfortunate incident serve as a stark reminder," he said, his voice resonating with quiet power. "No one, no individual, no homeowners association is above the law. The right to live peacefully in one's home, free from harassment and discrimination, is a cornerstone of our democracy. My office will be looking very closely at strengthening federal protections against such abuses of power at the local level. Justice does not and will not spare bigots or those who trample on the rights of others." The legal and public annihilation of Linda Carmichael and the Oak Haven Hills HOA was total. Linda was convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to prison, her reputation irrevocably destroyed. The HOA was hit with a $5 million civil judgment from Senator Reed's lawsuit, its assets frozen, and it was ultimately dissolved by court order, its reign of petty tyranny over. The videos Linda had so proudly posted to humiliate Malcolm became viral sensations, replayed endlessly as evidence of her own spectacular downfall and an object lesson in arrogant stupidity. Senator Reed, true to his word, used the entire settlement to establish the Reed Civil Rights Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal aid and advocacy for victims of housing discrimination and HOA abuse nationwide. As a legislator, he successfully championed the Homeowners Property Rights and Fair Housing Practices Act, a landmark piece of federal legislation that significantly strengthened protections for ordinary citizens against HOA overreach and discriminatory practices. And of course, any former member of the Oak Haven Hills HOA found to have participated in the harassment campaign was explicitly barred from ever receiving assistance from the Reed Civil Rights Fund. The final, uniquely fitting scene, several years later. Linda Carmichael, having served her prison sentence, is now on a work release program. Her job? She's part of a manual labor crew on a construction site tasked with building wooden fences for a new low-income housing project. She's struggling to lift heavy cedar posts, her face grimy with sweat and dust, her former arrogance long since ground into weary resignation. A small battery-operated radio on a nearby stack of lumber is playing a news report. And in Washington today, the reporter is saying, Senator Malcolm Reed announced that his Homeowners Property Rights Act has just helped its 10,000th family successfully fight discriminatory housing practices. Linda flinches at the name. Senator Reed's voice then comes on, clear and strong, from a clip of his speech. "A fence can be a boundary, a marker of where one person's rights end and another's begin. It can be a symbol of sanctuary. But let me be clear, no fence, no rule, no association should ever be allowed to become a barrier to justice or a wall built by prejudice. We must never allow anyone to destroy the fences that protect our fundamental rights. For those are the fences that keep our society strong and fair." The camera pulls back from Linda's miserable, toil-worn face, then pans up to a gleaming, newly inaugurated sign for a local branch of the Reed Civil Rights Fund. It depicts a strong, unblemished fence intertwined with the scales of justice, and beneath it, the words, "The Reed Civil Rights Fund. Justice stands strong." The imagined audience would be giving a thunderous ovation. Senator Power, she got fenced in by the law. That's how you legislate revenge. Justice in this case had not only been served, it had been enshrined in law.